Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What's really behind the stories of flying objects in the Bible? Could outsiders, quote-unquote, of some kind have been responsible for some of the stories recorded in the ancient Near East? Why do biblical scholars always seem to have German names? Okay, well, welcome to the 419th broadcast of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm not Ben, who usually says this. And those diverse questions came from me, Paul, Ben's dad. Now, Ben will call in if and when he can. Now, I hate to do this because we've had this weekly contest for years, and it's popular, but despite the able assistance of the staff here at the station, when I'm alone, I simply can't handle the calls, the script, and the guest at the same time. When Ben is here on Monday holidays, and when his semester ends in May, the contest will resume. Although I have been told I will have a producer if I need one, so maybe we can resume it, but not tonight. Anyway, Ben, as you may know, is having some trouble with his trouble getting to the show here on Mondays because he is now in Boston at Emerson College studying broadcasting. And is on the way home in the train and will call in to the show when he can. So hopefully he'll be calling in tonight with some questions. Anyway, we will review last week's question. In what town in Maine would you find the old rocking chair that seems to create hauntings whenever it's turned upside down? Actually, we were surprised that anyone answered that question correctly because this case is little known. But Tammy Tavares from Mansfield, Massachusetts nailed it from right there in the heart of the lovely Bridgewater Triangle, so-called. So let's move on to our distinguished guest. And the answer, of course, was South Paris, Maine. Dr. Michael S. Heiser is a scholar in the fields of biblical studies and the ancient Near East. He is the academic editor of Logos Bible Software. He earned his master's and doctoral degrees in Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2004. He also holds a master's in ancient history from the University of Pennsylvania with concentrations in ancient Israel and Egypt. Mike's main research interests are Israelite religion, especially Israel's Divine Counsel, as it's called in the Psalms, a fascinating biblical reference that I'm sure will come up tonight. Biblical theology, ancient Near Eastern religion, biblical and ancient Semitic languages, and more. He maintains 3 blogs, nakedbible.com, about biblical studies, paleobabble.com, dealing with weird beliefs about antiquity, such as might come up on this show, and UFOreligions.com, about how belief in extraterrestrials intersects with religion. Mike teaches ancient languages online at MEMRA, the Online Institute for Ancient Languages. He's a busy guy. Michael is the author of The Facade, which is a novel, and published last year, I believe, the Facade Special Edition. Dr. Michael Heiser, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Okay, Mr. Producer. There we go. Okay. Very good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. Michael, I have to tell you first, I read The Facade several years ago, and I must say that I enjoyed it immensely, and I've been a professional book editor, so I don't give compliments like that lightly. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with you. Okay.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, it was great. As a matter of fact, there were rumors of a sequel. Is that the special, the director's cut, so to speak? Is that the sequel or what?
Well, no, the special edition is a newly edited version of The Facade, and it has some additional content. Part of the additional content is at the end. There are the first 5 chapters of the sequel. I'm working on the sequel right now. So that's part of what makes the special edition special. And there's bibliography in there, new annotated bibliography. There's sort of the story of how The Facade came to be and all that sort of thing, too.
Very good. Okay. Well, I'll give you a chance to talk more about it later. Anyway, let's begin with a sort of inverted pyramid here. Start big and then get into the details. In my most recent book, published in 2006, I noted at least 360 different examples in the Bible alone of some kind of flying craft or shape or something, ascending, descending, hovering, or just flying, sometimes at great speeds. And that doesn't include such references in the Atrahasis, the Karsag epics, and other documents contemporary with early parts of the Bible. So what is your opinion of the work of those from Eric von Däniken on down who are convinced that many, if not all, of these references refer to the action of extraterrestrials, or at least a group of people from somewhere or someone else?
Yeah, I don't really think much of von Daniken's efforts there, or Zechariah Sitchin's. I mean, I'd have to see your list because I can't think of any, flying craft in the Bible other than things like, the chariot, the fire, and things like that. But the biblical writers, I mean, it had words for disc and for silver and for round and dome and all these things. And, what they describe when they talk about flying chariots are things like chariots and horses and flames. And, you'd have to assume that what they were looking at was not what we would think of as a UFO or something like that. And, same thing for the first chapter of Ezekiel. The vocabulary, that we would expect, again, some kind of round disc-shaped thing actually isn't there. It's a chair with wheels. And we sort of know what he was writing about because we have pictures, from the ancient Near East, ancient iconography that conforms to the description that Ezekiel gives us, and so I don't really think a whole lot of what's speculated by von Daniken and others in that regard.
Why? I always, all through the seminary and everything, I always wondered, why is it always the sky gods, not just Christians and Jews, but just about everybody? Why? I don't know, the Dogon, from the Dogon people all the way down to everybody. Why is it always the sky gods? Why the sky?
Because that's where humans don't live. It's the same thing with... Really.
No, you're right. I never thought of it that way.
With gods that come from the mountains or from the ocean depths. These are places where humans don't inhabit. They don't live there. And so, we live here on this thing we call Earth, this terrestrial realm, and so the gods must live somewhere else that removes them from humans, makes them remote, makes them, other, transcendent, or different, something that humans can't relate to or sort of get to. So it's sort of a natural place to put them from a culture that's what they know. They don't know outer space. They don't know, things that we sort of take for granted in our cosmological view of things and our view of the universe. But they do know places where they can't get to and where they don't live. I mean, it's not like today. People weren't going out and climbing Mount Everest in antiquity. They didn't have the equipment for it. So these places were places that were rarely even, ascended to, even, within miles, of an ancient person that was just doing, foot travel, without technology. So that's where the gods lived.
Okay, I suppose that's acceptable. I've always thought, too, that we have like 1 million years of human history that is absolutely unknown, officially at least. And, 1,000 civilizations could have risen and fallen. Are you a believer in the linear theory of human history or the cyclical theory? In other words, do you believe that we may have gone from stone tools to power tools more than once, as many cultures believe?
Well, I think technology tends to emerge as need is created. The whole, necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing. So I'm open to the idea that there would be quote unquote advanced technology at other times in the ancient world, but what that would look like, I don't know, and I don't think we have to necessarily conclude that technology would have developed in the same way that we experience it now. It's largely need driven and worldview driven, that sort of thing. Why the human mind is going to apply its knowledge and the skills of human beings in one direction or another. There's a certain amount of randomness to that and haphazardness. But I'll say this: that doesn't mean, even if they never had a widespread use, let's just say, of electricity, that doesn't mean that their technology was primitive, because they're doing things that are hard for us to figure out today with the tools they had. Some incredible feats of engineering that we can't look at them and sort of chuckle and say, well, you dunderheads, boy, we're a whole lot smarter than you were.
Yeah, that's a big mistake.
they could look at us and say, okay, well then you build that pyramid. Let's see how you do that. Because I mean we know how we would do it.
Exactly. Well, we?
Go figure that out.
Yeah.
Oh, I think the pyramids in megalithic architecture are largely well known. The popular perception is that scholars are just aghast and we have no idea how this was done and what a mystery and we're just so hopeless, and that's the popular impression.
Yes, it is.
The academic journal literature, the stuff that scholars write for other scholars. There's all sorts of stuff on Egyptian engineering that makes quite good sense. It's really leverage and applied counterweight. I don't know if you've ever seen. I'll give you an example here that has sort of leaked down to the popular culture. The work of Jean-Pierre Houdin, the French architect to the latest pyramid theory. Mm-hmm. It's all leverage and counterweight, but it's perfectly doable with what they had, and it's scalable. It's extraordinarily clever, but it's basic applied physics. But since our technology is so mechanized, and we're doing computer chips now and stuff like that, we often can't. We either don't or we can't think of how to problem solve without that stuff. Whereas the Egyptians and other ancient peoples, this is what they had, and they had mastered applied physical principles with the stuff they had, and it escapes us because we haven't had to use it for a couple hundred years. We're off on some other trajectory, and so we look back on that and go, oh boy, what in the world would we do? But there's plenty of Egyptian material where they draw what they're doing. There are remnants of vestiges of their technology, how they measured things. Illustrations of weight and counterweight. I mean, it's really not that much of a mystery in terms of the pyramids. I mean, there are other things that you could apply the same techniques to, but we don't actually know specifically whether the same techniques were used. But I mean, you could do it, but that doesn't mean we really know that was how it was done.
Well, as you speak, I'm thinking of Thor Heyerdahl, and I believe he was a leader of a group or Easter Island, and the big mystery. How on earth did they raise these? And somebody made the not unwise suggestion to ask the natives who were descendants of the original. How did? Yeah. And they said, "Oh, well, we could have told you that 50 years if you'd asked us, And they not only showed him, they demonstrated. And as you say,
there
it was
places at Easter Island that you can see some of the figurines are actually still in situ. They were never completely done as far as how they were carved, and there's no more trees on the island, and the speculation is because they were all used up because they were obsessed with making these figures, and they used them as rollers and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I actually just saw a special not too long ago on Easter Island, but yeah, it's like, why don't we ask some of those guys?
Yeah, I mean,
maybe they would know something.
That's the 21st century mind. Don't the obvious is not obvious. Let's get back.
If I can't do this with a microchip, then how
exactly?
Would I do it,
Yeah, we were drunk with technology. Anyway, let's get back to flying things. So, what was the chariot that carried Elijah away, and the pillar in the desert? What was all that then?
I think what they're describing, these are typical ways of describing the divine presence. Again, humans don't live in fire. Okay, we don't live in clouds. We don't have chariots that go across the sky. I mean, there are ways of describing the divine presence and where the deity traverses. Where he lives. And chances are, if the deity lives somewhere, he goes from place to place and observes what's going on earth. So he has to travel. The whole idea of a chariot, as opposed to, again, a quote-unquote more advanced idea of omnipresence. God just is where all these places are simultaneously. But I mean, the ancient mind thinks, he has to travel, because we have to travel, so the gods must have to travel, and since they live up there, they travel up there. And so they're using modes of expression that humans used for travel, in the case of the chariot, and they're transferring that up to the sky because, hey, he's got to get from point A to point B, doesn't he? Again, it's a very understandable second millennium BC way of describing how a deity would get from point A to point B, and they're using the vocabulary of the earthbound mode of transportation: horses, wheels. In the case of Ezekiel, a throne seat that that would have been carried along or borne, by animals or something like that. They're very time-bound, very understandable ways of describing things. The fire, well, humans don't live in fire, but the deity can. Well, that's no problem. He's not like us. He doesn't have a body. He's not going to burn up. He can appear in the form of a man, but isn't consumed. So again, a lot of this is to talk about and cast God in an otherness way. I mean, he is not us. We are not him. There is a gulf fixed between us that can't be bridged unless the deity descends or condescends to meet with us as we are. This is, by the way, this is one of the reasons I think in the Old Testament that Yahweh often does appear in the form of a man or an angelic man, a divine man, because God has a fundamental problem in biblical theology. Actually, he has two fundamental problems. If I really showed up disembodied the way I am, they wouldn't be able to process me with the five senses. And also, if I showed up, they'd die. So, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to appear in flame. We're going to appear as a human being. I'm going to veil myself with a cloud. Again, both in terms of where people are at, in their faith reception of things like the Bible. Either God is making these decisions for the benefit of humanity to help them process his presence and protect them, or this is the way that the biblical writer, would have described things, again, to denote this otherness idea that God is not a man.
Okay, because that brings up other questions, and I got a little bit of trouble when I asked this, not in trouble, but I was looked askance at when I asked this in the seminary, but it just stands to reason to me that I've always thought that the paranormal is really the mother of both religion and science. Had there been no questions to answer, had there been no mysteries to explain, neither would have been born, really, I don't think. And that's a rather simplistic approach, I understand. But in the seminary, I sort of thought, didn't religion, and I don't even like the term religion, it's not big enough to encompass faith and God and things, but didn't it begin with human encounters with supernatural beings, or what they thought were supernatural beings, or what really were supernatural beings, and then the result was the shaman? And today, you may have mystics, but you have the clergy who are sort of the administrators of the doctrine, when it became institutionalized. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, what is it they were encountering in the remote past?
I think there's a lot to what you're describing there, because it's going to be born out of experience, and any sort of non-mundane experience, to an ancient person, they're going to have to try to process that in some way, just like we would if we had some experience today that just really doesn't conform to our perception of reality. Well, I had the experience, so now I have to process it somehow. And again, that's where this paranormal, category, comes in. So I think you're largely correct there. That this is just sort of how things operated. As far as like getting, contacting that other reality that just doesn't quite conform to what I'm used to. You mentioned the shaman, and there were a lot of religions, that you had to. There would be a person that was either perceived as being able to, or would attempt to, contact and converse and, otherwise, mediate between the rest of the people and, this presence or this phenomena, this thing, this event, so on and so forth. And some people did that, because that put them in a position of power and authority over other people. But there were other people, I think, who, we'd have to say that they were serious about it. They were genuine about it. All faiths have this. How do we tap into the other side? Because the other side's going to know things, going to have knowledge that we don't. And chances are somebody from the other side would be able to solve our problem. Answer our question, that kind of thing. And a lot of that really is necessitated and driven by, again, some experience, whether it's like in the story of biblical theology, God condescending to come to humanity and reveal something about himself, and then, meeting with prophets and so on and so forth, or having them write something down for posterity, or, if it's some other way that it gets expressed in a different religion. But yeah, you're largely on the right track there.
Okay, well, the question is, what were they encountering? Who or what were they encountering that gave them this first experience? I mean, was it always God, or was it something or someone else?
Well,
could it have been?
Ultimately, well, I think here's where I get in trouble. I mean, you just talked about how people looked at you like you had two heads. Well, here's my example of this. The biblical theology articulates a populated spiritual world. Now, we usually parse that as, well, there's God, and then there's angels, and then there's demons and stuff like that. And we have, I think, pretty simplistic and kind of primitive views of that. But the Bible actually goes a lot further than this, that the other side is filled with divine beings. I like to use the phrase divine beings, and there's a variety of them. There's a hierarchy there. They're differentiated by what they are, and powers and things like that. And so I would say that behind these religious episodes and stories, you can have contact with any number of different divine beings. So I don't know that there's a way that we can really drill down further into that, but I don't think it has to be just one or two. I think that's sort of a kind of a wishful idea that's going on. And there's competition. Let me give you an example. There are all these rules in the Old Testament against contacting the dead or contacting the other side. And commands are given in the Bible to forbid you from doing something that you could do. In other words, there's no command that says, thou shalt not walk on water. Okay, I got that one down. I'm never in danger of violating that one.
Well, you would be able to today, and with the temperature here, you could walk on water.
Yeah, really. But when the God of Israel says, look, I don't want you to do this, that, and the other thing to contact, other gods, it was a serious thing, because the assumption is that you could. You could solicit divine beings on the other side who would answer. And the God of the Bible is demanding loyalty on the part of His people. I'm the only God you should serve. You come to me, I'll give you, the information you want, or I'll give you the answer. Because frankly, if you're going to do this, you're now on my turf. You're now on what we call the spiritual world, or the other side. And you don't know what you're going to get. I do, because I live here, and frankly, I rule it. But you don't. So if you do this, not only are you violating the covenant loyalty that I have with you, but you're just doing something really, really dangerous that you will not be able to parse correctly.
I agree with that.
You could really get burned.
Yeah, at 42 years in the paranormal, I can certainly agree with that. Mike, we're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, minus the Ben this evening, unfortunately, and our guest, Dr. Michael Heiser. We'll be right back, and you're listening to it, of course, on WOON, 1240 a.m. in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back.
Family Resource Community Action is now enrolling for several training programs to help you get back on the employment track. For more information, attend an information session held each Wednesday at 3 p.m. at 55 Main Street in Woonsocket, or call 401-235-6045 for more information.
You can depend on us for public service, ON Radio.
Hi, this is Mike Logan inviting you to join me all season long for Providence College men's hockey right here on 1240 WOON.
ON Radio, ON Worldwide.
And then we have Providence College hockey. They skate on water, actually. So we're back with Mike Heiser, Dr. Mike Heiser, expert in ancient Near Eastern languages and the ancient Near East itself, and we're talking about UFOs in the Bible, or what are generally thought of as such. Now, Mike, we were talking before the break about divine beings, and the question of the Divine Counsel, as it's called, comes up. Could you explain what that is?
Sure. The Divine Counsel is a term that really derives from Psalm 82, and it's sort of the academic term, and I would say the biblical term, for the heavenly host. The idea that, again, that God has a bureaucratic relationship with other non-human beings that he has created who serve him, or at least are supposed to. They can rebel. Again, Psalm 82 itself is pretty clear about that. But again, it's just this idea that there's, this host of heaven, this great, pantheon. I mean, Bible believers don't really like the word pantheon because it sounds like, what's going on in ancient Greece or Rome. But it just refers to, again, a heavenly bureaucracy. It doesn't really say anything in particular about, what kind of beings are in there, and is there one that's unique, and is there hierarchy, difference in attributes, and so on and so forth. But that's basically what the term is.
Okay. Well, it of course this gets to the idea of what is a divine being. Let me throw the book at you, Mike, here, or in this case, the books, my last 3 books. A long time ago, when I started in this field in 1971, when I was in the seminary, the reason I wasn't ordained is because I didn't like what I was doing. But I was investigating quote-unquote ghosts and things like this. And the stuff I was running into, the old superstitions and all the stuff about, the spiritualist approach, it just didn't do it. It just wasn't good enough, and it didn't answer the questions. So to make a long story short, I ended up finding out about quantum mechanics and the idea of the multiple worlds theory. And this is in consultation with certain physicists, and I didn't just point myself some kind of expert here. I worked with Dr. Heiser Ryan at Duke University by correspondence, and Father John Nicola, and all these people who were well known at the time. So today, and this really seems to work when Ben and I deal with these things of people having problems in this realm. There seem to be many different if you want to say alternate realities or alternate universes or whatever, and people ask me what's the theology there, and to me, it seems like the creation was an explosion of divine love. I mean, why should that love be limited to one reality? Maybe God created all possibilities, all probabilities, and the whole thing balances out into a perfect harmony. That's my eccentric, but I don't know, theology, I suppose.
It's actually really not eccentric. It's
in there.
It's sort of a quasi Gnosticism.
I suppose
so it's very old. I mean, it's not real Gnosticism, but
and that's what I hoped you'd say. But go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't think you have to. I don't think you're driven there by the quantum reality. And here's why I say that. Again, a lot of Christians and real conservative Jews don't parse things this way, but if they really had a handle on their biblical theology, they would be forced to recognize this. By definition, again, in a non-Gnostic, I'll pretend I'm a non-Gnostic physicist here, to answer this question. In a non-Gnostic view, again, in a biblical theological view, by definition, there is only one uncreated being, and that would be God. Okay? Mm-hmm. That means that everything else that the Bible itself recognizes as a spiritual entity is made of something. It has to be. Now, a non-Gnostic view is firmly dualistic when it comes to creation. Can I just interrupt? Sure. I beg your pardon for interrupting, but could you explain a bit about what Gnosticism is? Because we have a lot of people stuck in traffic who are frustrated enough. Gnosticism, again, there are different. There is no one Gnostic theology. The Gnostic texts don't all agree with each other, but I'll give you the nutshell ideas. Gnosticism posits that there is something that they would refer to as the true God. Okay, this sort of divine. He's really not a person. It's more or less like an essence from which all things come, and some of those things are divine beings called aeons. And in Gnostic cosmology and mythology, one of the aeons rebels and decides, her name is Sophia. She says, I want to be like the true God. I want to be like the ultimate deity, and I'm going to create my own other divine being. And so she does this, and that divine being turns out really badly. He's a bad guy, and that particular divine being is called the demiurge, or the maker, the creator. And that, in Gnostic theology, is the God of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So right away there's this friction between, the normative, Christian view and then the Gnostic Christian view about what's going on with the God of the Old Testament. Well, the God of the Old Testament, again, in the Gnostic thinking, the demiurge says, well, hey, I'm going to do some creating myself. So I'm going to create the heavens and the earth, and I'm going to create these things we call humans on them, and they're going to be my slaves. You see how this sounds a lot like Zecharia Sitchin, by the way.
Oh yeah, it does.
So I'm going to make this slave race. Well, Sophia is horrified. Why did I ever do that? I should not have done that. And so she puts a spark of herself into the human, so that the human is not just going to be a lifeless automaton slave. There will be hope that the human will someday realize what he and she is. That they have this spark of divinity within them, and so that for the Gnostic, salvation is the recognition, the realization, the awakening that we are divine. Again, that's in a nutshell. That's the Gnostic idea. Well, if you believe that, then you're a monist, because then the true God, the one that's above the Maker in heaven and earth, the way up there, true God, everything that is created is part of Him, and He is part of it. And so you don't have a distinction between the Creator and the created. Everything is all part and parcel, ultimately, of one. Hence the term monism. The Bible, though, presents dualism, that there's a firm distinction between the Creator and the things that are created. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, again, going back, pretending I'm the quantum physicist here, and I have friends who are very serious Christians who are research physicists, and they're not troubled at all by the quantum issue.
Yeah, so do I.
To them, it's like, well, okay, this is obviously the way God made the material world, and these things we think of as angels or other contingent gods, other contingent divine beings, spirits, whatever label you want to stick on them, by definition, they have to be made of something. They are part of the created order, even though we can't see them. So visibility is not a synonym for materiality. And so if you look at things that way, and then you go and look at all this stuff that you investigate as a paranormal investigator, and all this stuff that's been written, and experiences that people have had, there very well could be an intelligent reality, an entity or something like that behind what people say they experience. I mean, that's very possible within a dualistic biblical worldview. That's why I said, well, you don't have to be a Gnostic to really parse that.
No.
But a lot of Christians and conservative Jews, they're not even at first base, when it comes to that, because what they're looking for is a chapter and verse, that says, oh, there are these paranormal entities, and here's the list. That you don't get that. You have to be thinking theologically with the material that the Bible does give you, and of course, if we really believe that all truth does come from God, then the truth of the material world has to be honored. It has to be put, on the same level, and we can't dismiss it. And so something like quantum mechanics and quantum theory, quantum realities, can't just be done away with. You have to do something with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know what you mean. I am in seventh heaven having this conversation, but I don't want to lose some of our readers. There speaks the writer. I don't want to lose some of our listeners here on this. But I would get back to the question. See, the thing with the Divine Counsel is it is popularly interpreted. And it's not. I suppose it's interpreted in the academic realm because of the way academicians are trained. They learn from others who believe a certain way, and that's how that kind of goes that way. But it looks as though, and even in Hebrew, to my lousy Hebrew, it looks as though you've got God talking to other divine beings who are gods themselves, because these are all relative terms, I suppose. They're labels. So, who is he talking to in this Divine Counsel? Even if it's a poetic device of some kind used by the psalmist, what is the concept that's really being... I'll tell you what we were taught in the seminary when we even dealt with it. It was that, God is expressing His dominion over all creation as summed up by these nature forces and all different stuff that is sitting around this council in this anthropomorphic form, the human form, so to speak. I mean,
I'd be impressed if you ever got to Psalm 82 in seminary.
I actually was rather impressed. That was 10 years in the seminary, so. Oh, okay. Yeah. Actually, before I let me interrupt you one more time. I believe Ben is on the line, our co-host.
Yes, I was attempting to break into the conversation, and it didn't really work.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, the voice of Ben, folks, from the great beyond. So, Ben, do you have a question for Mike, or what are your thoughts on this?
I did, but then you asked it.
Oh, okay. Yes, we know each other's other people.
I did come up with a few questions while I was remotely viewing the show via the internet on my phone. So okay. I'm sorry if this sounds sketchy. I'm coming to you live from the commuter rail from Boston. So,
all right.
So I had a quick question. This kind of takes away from, I don't know if you guys touched on this earlier because I kind of missed the first 15 minutes. So did you guys touch upon the theme of the sky god or no?
I get into the thing of why is it always the sky gods, and might kind of explain this where people are not. I don't know if you would consider that good enough.
Well, it's also the sea gods, and the under the earth gods and the mountain gods. It's not just the sky gods.
Well, my point to Mike was that people must have experienced something or someone somehow, somewhere. And, I pointed out the vast stretch of unknown prehistory when there could have been all kinds of things going on. So that's what we kind of get into a little bit. Although I'll be honest with you. I'm sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, no, I was also going to say, I was listening to Michael's notion of the, what's the good word for this? Like a cosmic hierarchy or something like that.
Right.
So I wrote down the point that it's a very hard thing to explain, and it's trying to explain non-human things with human words.
Yes, I think that's a good point. What say you, Mike?
Well, this does get into the question you asked before we were joined here. That is, to a lot of people, this sounds polytheistic.
Yeah, having to do with many gods, yeah.
Right. The reason for that is because our ear has been trained to look at the word G-O-D as a word that is equatable and only equatable with a very specific set of attributes. And so if you have more than one of them, therefore you must be saying that we have a whole bunch of gods that are competing for position and jockeying for power and all, again, like the Greek and Roman, mythology thing. That's a misunderstanding of Elohim, the Hebrew word Elohim.
Dear old Elohim, yeah.
And here's why. It's really not that hard to parse, but it's one of those things that doesn't get examined because as soon as you start to examine it, you're kicked out of seminary.
Tell me about
it. Or you're discouraged from doing so, but it's really not that difficult. The biblical writer, now think about this, these are Jews, okay? The biblical writers use the term Elohim of 4 or 5 different things. Right. They use it of the God of Israel. They use it of beings that are called Shadim in Deuteronomy 32:17, which usually gets translated demon. They use it of the departed spirit of the deceased Samuel in 1 Samuel 28:13. Mm-hmm. Depending on how you understand the first couple verses of Genesis 32 and what it's referencing in the past, it could be used of angels. And it's also used of these other beings in this council of Psalm 82. So you got 5 different things. Now here's the point. If a Jew, a biblical writer, an Israelite, thought that the word Elohim could properly only describe a singular being with a very specific, unique set of attributes, why would he ever do that? Why would he ever use the term of 4 different things in addition to the God of Israel? He very plainly does. So that tells us that he's not looking at the term Elohim as attribute-driven. It means something else. It does not mean a specific set of attributes the way we look at the letters G, O, and D. What Elohim simply means, and the reason you'd use it of 5 different things, is Elohim is the word you would use to describe a being that lives on the other side, in the other reality, in the spiritual world. It's what I call a term of address. In other words, it gives me the address. It gives me the location of a being. Not the human realm, the other realm. Now, over in that other realm, you have lots of Elohim running around. One of them is what I like to call species unique. That is the God of Israel, because the biblical writers claim that particular Elohim created all the other ones. That particular Elohim is absolutely, utterly unique. You have rank and power in that other realm. Just like in our realm, we have human. Well, humans differ widely in ability and widely in their human-to-human hierarchical relationships. It's the same description put over in the spiritual world. So the biblical understanding of Elohim is not the understanding that we give to G-O-D. This is why we're so confused. We do not parse the Bible like an ancient Semite would. We parse it like a 17th century European would.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's when the term monotheism was invented. I don't think monotheism says enough about the biblical use of Elohim. I don't really think any of our words do. I don't think monolatry is adequate. I don't think polytheism certainly is adequate. I don't think monotheism is adequate. What an Israelite believed was that Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. You have to describe what they believed. You can't just put a word on it.
Well, no.
And it's very confusing, for us who've grown up in the Western European Judeo-Christian traditions to think like this. It's foreign to us. It's a foreign context.
Well, still, I think Ben has a point that we're dealing with things that, as we often say on the show, really our language is not up to actually describing. But the problem, Mike,
they're trying to order and describe a realm that they're not part of.
They're trying to describe the indescribable.
Right, they're trying to describe the indescribable. And so, again, if you put this in the context, let's say, of a conservative or a high view of Scripture, inspiration, God is. I don't believe that in the doctrine of inspiration that God gives the writers every word and all that kind of stuff. But they're getting some kind of help to use their language, the vehicle of their human language, which is inadequate to describe what they're being asked to describe. And they're doing the best they can. They're giving it their best shot. They're using human verbiage to describe this indescribable thing. And so it falls short, but yet it is still useful. I mean, you can get somewhere with the vocabulary.
Well, the problem, Mike, and Ben may be able to amplify this, is that in ancient Hebrew, as you know, because this is your field, there are no vowels. Words run together in manuscripts, and we don't even know what the original words of the Bible actually were. I've actually seen.
Well, I think that's kind of an uber skepticism there. They don't need vowels today. I mean, if you pick up an Israeli
there are vowel marks.
Vowels, right? But an unpointed text, a lot of Israeli newspapers don't use vowels, or even websites or anything like that.
Well, they
don't use
words.
Vowels today. But what they have is an inductive knowledge of their language, and so they can process it without. When I teach Hebrew online, I discourage people from looking at the vowels and memorizing the vowel forms unless they're important, because I try to tell people, look, you can do the reason a 7-year-old kid could come over to your seminary class and take Hebrew and blow you all away is because he doesn't need the vowels. You're sitting there trying to memorize all this stuff, and it's just driving you nuts. You don't need it. But the oldest manuscripts we have, the words are divided. I mean, you don't get this endless string of, where do we divide everything now? This is a hopeless endeavor. The Dead Sea Scrolls have word division in them. You just have to observe the spacing. So I think that's a little bit of a hermeneutics of despair when it comes to this. It's actually more true with the Greek New Testament.
That's even worse. I hate to rush us along here, Mike, but
stuff was like that.
I hate to rush us along, but we're burning up the hour here, and I want to give Ben a chance. Ben, do you have any further questions here? Because I wanted to get into another, to a related question here.
Well, like I said before, but Michael already sort of answered this. Like, I came in halfway through the show, so I missed most of the stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you touched upon this either. Like, it seems as if the being in the New Testament is different than the being in the Torah. Would you agree?
I actually had an Old Testament professor who said that it was hard to believe the God of the Old Testament was the God of the New Testament.
But it's hard to believe. It's hard for me to believe then that New Testament professor is looking at the use of the Old Testament in the.
Well, he was an Old Testament professor.
Yeah.
See, the problem here, Mike, is that this stuff was translated by believers.
Well, but before we go off on translation, the premise is fundamentally not true. And here's what I mean by that. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The divine warrior imagery of the Old Testament, God, the great warrior fighting battles and all this stuff, that gets applied to Jesus in Ephesians. It gets applied to Jesus in Revelation.
Yeah.
I mean, in some cases, just point blank, right down the list. I mean, there are lots of motifs that people assume this isn't what Jesus is like that get applied to Jesus in the New Testament. So I don't accept the premise from the get-go. So I think he must have been a Lutheran. I mean, because
no, not quite, but I get your point. But let's try and get back on this is all great. I love talking to people about this, but let's get back to I guess suppose you might say flying objects in the Old Testament. So do you? The trouble is, and I have this trouble with the super skeptics all the time. Not that I'm saying you're a super skeptic, but they weren't there. And they say that, well, you couldn't have experienced that, it must have been this. I mean, they weren't there. I was there, and I think I'm a relatively intelligent person and relatively well-educated. So I guess we could say the same about ourselves in reference to ancient occurrences. Is there any way, there isn't any way we could know exactly what occurred to prompt the story of the flaming chariot that hauled Elijah away, or the Enoch stories, of course, most of them which are apocryphal. But you see what I'm saying at.
Yeah, we have to make a choice. We can either impose a 20th and 21st century speculation about extraterrestrial travelers onto the ancient text, or we can allow them to use the words that were at their disposal to tell us.
Well, why do they have to be extraterrestrials?
Well, it doesn't. But my point is that they had a wide range of vocabulary that if they were seeing something that didn't look like a throne or didn't look like a chariot, they have the vocabulary to describe those things. But they choose to say chariot. They choose to say horse. They knew what a horse looked like. They chose to say throne with a pedestal, with a four-faced cherubim underneath, with a chair with wheels. Every element of Ezekiel's vision. We do get some help with Ezekiel in Daniel 7. Every element there is actually known from pictorial carvings of the period of Ezekiel. The Babylonian, that's where Ezekiel is in the book. He's sitting there by the river Kivar in Babylon saying, we got our butts kicked in the exile. What are we doing here? I mean, that's where he is. And every one of those elements is known. Now, I actually think, my own view of this, and I didn't invent it, I think what's going on there is what we would call astral theology or astral symbolism. It has to do with the zodiac, because the four faces of the cherubim are the four cardinal points of the Babylonian zodiac. I mean, I don't think that's coincidental. I mean, there's something going on there beyond your typical sort of Christian seminary evangelical reading of the text. But we have a fundamental decision to make. Either we're going to let them communicate to us with their words, knowing they could have picked other words, or we're just going to let our imaginations win the day with that. And I'm very cautious. I like to take them at face value, even though a lot of what I think they're talking about doesn't really conform to what people would be comfortable with, who are, again, conservative Jews or Christians. But be that as it may, again, I try to give the ancient writer the benefit of the doubt.
All right, well, that's a lot of doubt in my opinion. I mean, God bless them. But Ben, any thoughts?
No, I'm all thought it out.
All right, I just, with the greatest respect, Mike, I just think it's not good enough. I mean, I'm thinking of the history of UFO sightings, regardless of what they were or whatever. People in the 19th century described them as airships, and people, who because they didn't know anything about airplanes.
I think someone could be describing some sort of, otherworldly encounter. I don't have any trouble with that. What I'm saying though is for us to have what we feel like is the answer, and the answer is something that we would parse as extraterrestrials, when none of the texts have any reference to a planet beyond Saturn. In terms of a lot of these texts, they don't describe the deities, in the sort of craft that would have to be flight worthy for that kind of thing. I mean, you don't get interplanetary travel with internal combustion engines. They know what fire is. That's what they're seeing. That's what they're looking at. If it wasn't fire, they'd have to come up with something else. I just try to give the writers the benefit of the doubt, because if I wrote something, I would hope that 1,000 years from now somebody would give me the same benefit of the doubt.
Okay. All right, Mike, I don't always agree with you here, and I just think it's a great conversation. I'm sorry?
You don't have to.
No, I know. But why don't you just take a minute here, just about all we have, and tell people again about your books and your websites and where they can find out more about you.
If they want to find out more about the Facade and the special edition, they go to www.fasadethebook, that's F-A-C-A-D-E, thebook.com, and my homepage is drmsh.com.
Very good. I really recommend The Facade. It's a great book. Really enjoyed it. Mike, thank you very much. Ben, any parting words here?
Well, I'll be home in about half an hour.
Okay.
And I will be with you live on next Sunday, yes.
Very good. Excellent. Good. Mike, thanks a lot. Probably be a touch off the air. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'd like to continue it.
All right. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm really delighted to have Ben with us. And, I certainly wanted to thank again our guest, Dr. Michael Heiser, and check out his websites when you can. Certainly, BehindTheParanormal.com is our website, and we have over 450 almost 450 free podcasts of shows from CBS and from here, WON, and some online stuff we've done, and of course the Rendlesham Forest UFO event series that we had in 2010, 2011. You can also buy my books on those sites. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and you can apply to become a reporter at the site. Ben, if you have any parting thoughts,
I'm sorry, he's gone.
He's gone. Okay. Well, he'll be with us on days off, but if you can call in from the train like that, that'll be great. So anyway, next week, February 4th, there will be an open line show to once again plunge into that ever-growing stack of emails that Ben and I have on all questions of the paranormal from different realms, and it should be interesting. And on our CBS radio edition on February 3rd, Ben and I will host an open line show that can be heard in Boston, Seattle, Detroit, and Pittsburgh, or online at radio.com. And you can get to the OMC Detroit site, and you can listen to the show through that. We leave you this evening with some advice from Scottish author and philosopher Thomas Carlyle. A loving heart is the beginning of all knowledge. And I don't know if we're quite done yet here. We have another. Is that a call for us?
No, it's the FBI.
It's the FBI. I want to know what's going on. Yeah, okay. So anyway, I want to thank you for sailing with us on our great cosmic journey, and we will see you next time.
You've got about a minute and a half.
We got about a minute and a half. Okay. Thanks a lot for telling me. Okay. No problem. No problem. It's a good thing I'm not by myself. Again, we had our guest this evening on the subject of the ancient Near East, and Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser. Certainly, I think certainly a man of faith, but I think that there are other ways to interpret certain things, and I don't know, it's anybody's guess. And as we always say on the show, everything you know is wrong, which means you really don't know anything. And I think that one thing I really didn't bring up with Mike was the whole notion of epistemology, the study of knowledge, how we know what we know. And I really think that when you get down to it, we really don't know anything for sure about our world, about ourselves, about our planet even. And really, very often, scientific laws, quote unquote, have been challenged and brought down from time to time. It really all is a matter of faith. Future guests will include a number of interesting people, certainly, and we always encourage you to visit BehindTheParanormal.com to see guests who are past, present, and future, and find out more about Ben and myself, and again, to get those free podcasts. So We will see you next week here on Behind
Return
the
to
Paranormal,
this radio
WON,
frequency
1240 a.m.
167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.